I told a Dutchman that his country was Britain's greatest enemy, and by the end of dinner, he agreed with me. By the end of this, you'll see how a $7 trillion company ended up fusing with Britain and changing the world economy. Now, at first he was somewhat perplexed. He actually laughed at the notion that they could be our greatest enemy. The greatest enemy? How could a country be a great enemy, he asked. Well, I said, there's nothing like a competitor to bring the best out. But for me to truly explain why, I need to take you back in time. I need to take you to the 1600s, when the British Parliament and the Crown were literally killing each other. And of course, during the Golden Age of Amsterdam. Now, for someone who knows nothing about this period, King of England in the mid-1600s was a man called Charles I. He was stubborn, but what king isn't? What separated Charles I from every other king is that the institution of Parliament, which had been created centuries earlier as a kind of administrator to the monarchy, had matured. It had grown in power, influence, and size. The stubborn, belligerent Charles I and Parliament came to a head when Charles I wanted to do something that Parliament didn't want him to do, and so they fought each other. Can you imagine a parliamentary army and a royal army fighting each other on British soil? Parliament won the war, and as a result, Charles I was executed in January 1649. This is the moment that Parliament superseded the monarchy as the most powerful institution in the land. And it would also be the beginning of the notion of checks and balances when it comes to the institutions of power. Meanwhile, at this exact same time in Amsterdam, they were experiencing their golden age. Some of the footage that you're seeing is actual footage that I took from that trip in Amsterdam. What a beautiful place it is. What does the golden age look like? There was a company called the Dutch East India Company. It is, to this day, the most valuable company that has ever existed. It would be worth, in today's money, $7 trillion. Thousands of ships sailing all over the world, collecting high-value goods and selling them into markets. And to give you an idea of how valuable this company was, it's worth more than Apple and Microsoft combined. But what was their secret? How did they do it? Well, unlike their Spanish and Portuguese counterparts, the Dutch used a model of private investors. They raised their money privately. In fact, these investors would buy shares in a voyage. And born out of this was the first stock exchange, where the shares could be bought and sold on a secondary market. The Spanish and Portuguese enterprise was owned entirely by the royal family. But in the Dutch version, all of the money was raised privately. But the ships were given state charter, which meant they could fly the Dutch flag and sail under Dutch authority, raise armies and all the good stuff. But the funding came from the market. And this is a moment of explosion in culture in Amsterdam. This is when lots of the canals are forged, and the architecture that we see, and the merchant class, and the risk-taking. It was the most ascendant city anywhere in the world. Now, the English did actually create their own East India Company. It was actually created by Queen Elizabeth I, not long before she died in the late 1500s. But it never really competed very well to any meaningful extent with its Dutch counterpart. Now, the British system and the Dutch system were largely the same. The Dutch didn't have a monarchy, and that's why they gave it a state charter. The British did have a monarchy. They actually had re-established the monarchy after they cut the head off of Charles I. There was a republic for about 10 years, and then the monarchy returned. And so the English East India Company had a royal charter. Same concept. Flag on the back, can raise armies, it can claim territory in the name of Great Britain. Now, towards the end of the 17th century, in what became known as the Glorious Revolution, there was a king of England that just about everybody in England despised. His name was James II. Meanwhile, in Holland, there lived a man by the name of Wilhelm III, or William of Orange, who had a direct bloodline to the reigning Stuarts. Now, there was lots of back-channeling going on, but it was decided that William of Orange, Wilhelm III, would make a claim on the English throne. He sailed across the channel, soldiers and all, just in case there was a fight. But he came to a very enthusiastic, welcoming crowd, a very supportive British public who welcomed him with open arms, and he walked into London and took the throne. James II, who was King of England, ran away to France in exile. And it was at that moment that the two countries fused. William III, Wilhelm III, William of Orange, became King of England. Parliament still had the power, which is why Parliament was the more powerful institution, of course. But the King of England is still the King of England. And so our deadliest competitor didn't just join us, he brought with him his contacts and was the missing ingredient, in many ways, to how we were going to compete, finally, against the Dutch. And so the Dutch were our greatest enemy because they forced us to level up. And actually, we couldn't beat them until we, in a way, embodied them by claiming one of theirs as one of ours, making him King of England. And it was at that point, this merger changed the trajectory. And actually, the ascendant British or English East India Company surpassed the Dutch East India Company. Now, it never became more valuable, historically speaking, than the Dutch East India Company, but it did become more powerful. And there were ways that they differed. For example, the Dutch didn't colonize, really. They just built military bases. But the English and the British did colonize, which is why the Dutch person that I was enjoying a glass of wine and a steak with, that's why we were having that conversation in English. Because the way we approached it, the way the British approached it, we wanted to be colonizers. And the old adage, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, couldn't be truer. Now, this was all very enjoyable to my Dutch friend. He didn't know any of this. And he actually said that I should quit my job and do that, teach that, become a teacher. Well, like many of us YouTubers, we keep the channel secret from people in our real world life. But you can help me out by subscribing and commenting and liking and sharing and doing all the good stuff. Thanks for watching.